These are atomic bomb scale wildfire events. These are really serious things that absolutely overwhelm any fire suppression capacity. These are just the worst of the worst. You do not want to have this in your environment.
Fire is raging through a dry and heat-stressed European landscape. In Greece, gale-force winds have intensified more than 70 wildfires, forcing authorities to evacuate hundreds of residents. The severe conditions have also crippled the emergency response. After 3 firefighters were killed battling blazes in Crete and the Greek mainland last week, tragedy struck again overnight, when 2 Australian-owned helicopters collided mid-air west of Athens, killing a Danish pilot and a Greek national. For weeks, the focus has been on fires racing through France and Spain.
On a la situation aujourd'hui qui est la plus dure qu'on ait jamais mesurée, la plus dure depuis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale.
More than 330,000 people have been driven from their homes. Tourist towns across France's Atlantic coast have been emptied, their permanent and temporary residents told to seek refuge elsewhere. Among them, the Tui family, ordered to leave their seaside village of Longtemps 10 days ago.
When we evacuated, they hadn't closed all the road, and we took one that actually drove us straight into like a fire area.
Yeah, we went from, sunny to a certain extent, but smoky where we were, to just complete nighttime darkness.
An hour after reaching safety, they were evacuated again.
I've never seen that in my entire life. Like, the entire towns being evacuated is a big thing, especially because we're in a place where, everybody lives through the same road.
Adelaide company Aerotech has been helping with the emergency response in France since the first blaze broke out.
How are the guys at France going?
Yeah, they're busy, mate. Flying every day. And
we've got 4 planes over there, 6 pilots. The flying conditions on any fire are going to involve high temperatures, turbulence, high winds. You're going to have low visibility. These are the characteristics of a fire ground.
After decades of fighting fires in Australia, Aerotech has been part of France's fire response for 4 years. But even with their help, it's not enough. French authorities have been scrambling to find more aircraft. Some of those reinforcements are from Australia, including 24 firefighters, a Chinook helicopter and a reconnaissance and support aircraft.
They're trying to add more aircraft into the fleet, trying to mobilise them in somewhat of a panic fashion. That's not going to be a sustainable way of dealing with these fires, because it's not going to have the efficacy. They're going to get there too late.
We shouldn't be relying on fire suppression to solve this problem. We've got to go back to the landscapes and just reduce the hazards in the landscapes.
Globally, catastrophic wildfires are becoming a more regular occurrence as climate change induces more intense heat waves and burns places not normally thought of as particularly fire-prone, like Norway, Scotland and even soggy old Ireland. Professor David Bowman says the way the world thinks about fire needs to change.
We're in an arms race with the worsening fire weather because of climate change. So what used to work in the past has got to be improved.
At his fire lab in Hobart, Professor Bowman studies the flammability of different plants.
You can take a well-hydrated plant and you challenge it with fire. It doesn't really want to burn, even things like eucalypts. But if you dry them out, get them what you would expect under a flash drought like they're experiencing with heat waves in Europe, you can take a plant that doesn't really want to burn to being explosive.
His team is also researching how to create what they call green halos around populated areas so they're less prone to burn.
It could be anything from using grazing animals to just eat grass. It could be from mowing strips. It could be from using prescribed burning to reduce fuels It could be thinning vegetation and using prescribed burning.
It's a message even Australia is yet to heed. Last week, a Victorian parliamentary report identified fuel load management as one of several systemic shortcomings in preparing and responding to this year's devastating bushfires, which burned more than 440,000 hectares and destroyed 451 homes.
This is actually a tractable and soluble problem, and we're just going to have to sink our teeth into this and solve it.
In France, crews hastily built fire breaks in a bid to stop the spread of the fire threatening Bordeaux, allowing displaced residents, like the Tui family, to return to their homes.
It feels very surreal to me. I don't remember as a kid, even as a young adult, having fires like this. For me, we're not in a bush area, like fire bush area at all.
Greg Mullins is a former New South Wales fire chief with nearly 40 years as a firefighter, including working with US fire departments. He's been critical of government preparedness in the past and is warning we're living in a new era of fire danger. He's also the founder of Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. Greg Mullins, welcome to 7:30.
Hi, Sarah.
As we watch those scenes unfolding in Europe and in North America, what should Australians be expecting this summer?
Look, we had the major fires in Victoria earlier this year. We lost homes in New South Wales, Western Australia. We're going into a very big El Nino, the biggest El Nino on record. So the chances are we're going to have an active fire season. Hopefully not like we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere, but there's every possibility that we will.
Now, European countries have been to some extent following Australia's lead on hazard reduction. How much of a protection does it offer?
Well, look, what we do know is that it's the only broad-scale mitigation tool that we have to reduce the intensity of fires. We also know that they won't stop fires. The protective effect only lasts for 3 to 5 years after burning. And the Royal Commission, following the Black Summer fires, found that fuel loads across Australia were pretty much the same as have been in the last 30 years. There's no real reduction in the amount of burning that's taken place, and that the fires, the climate change driven wildfires that we had in our Black Summer were unstoppable, and a few kilometres of burning would not stop spot fires going 12 kilometres ahead, pyroconvective storms formed by the fires with lightning strikes 100 kilometres ahead. So we're in a different era of fire.
If that mitigation doesn't work from hazard reduction fires, what do we do? Because we have become very reliant on that as a tool, haven't we?
Yes, well, and we've seen over that since Black Summer, they were stopped by massive rains in February 2020. We had those record floods right up to 2022, including in Lismore. What that's done, it's stopped us from carrying out preventive burning. Now, it's just been too wet to burn. And what we increasingly find is that conditions swing from being too wet to suddenly too hot and dry. And we've had hazard reduction burns in Sydney, for example, getting out of hand just a week after we've had rain. So the hotter temperatures dry out the bush very quickly, and the effectiveness of hazard reduction, not the effectiveness, but the ability to carry out hazard reduction, the windows have reduced from months every year to just weeks.
You wrote earlier this year that what frightens firefighters the most is losing the night, you said, the night being the time when the temperature used to drop. Have we lost that distinction between day and night?
Yes, Sarah. I grew up fighting fires beside my father, and I've been fighting fires for 55 years. And I remember in the early days, he'd say, night times when you get in and you knock the fires out, you light back burns, you starve the fires of fuel. And we always tried by dawn the next day to have fires out. These days, fires can burn overnight just as fiercely as they did during the day. Through Black Summer, that happened regularly. It's because temperatures are higher, relative humidity, the moisture in the air doesn't reduce overnight when the temperatures are high, and the temperature differentials drive very strong winds. We saw that New Year's Eve 2019 and south coast communities in Gippsland, where fires were driven by gale force winds downslope into those towns from midnight. It's happening now in Washington State in the USA, 120 kilometre per hour winds driving firestorms and overnight. And this is really worrying for someone like me because the old rule book just doesn't work anymore in the worst years.
You're painting a bleak picture, so I want to talk to you about resources and readiness. First of all, what kind of a difference does it make with these longer fire seasons, obviously in the Northern Hemisphere, for sharing resources?
Well, we saw this in 2018. We had major fires in Queensland from July 2018, and then in August 2018 we were losing homes in New South Wales on the far south coast, Bega, Ulladulla. There were no large firefighting aircraft available for Australia. There were none here. At that same time, Northern California was burning at a time when their fire season should have been over. And so increasingly, our fire seasons are overlapping. US fire seasons are getting longer. Canada's fire seasons are getting longer. Our fire seasons are getting longer. Where it was the northern summer and the southern summer and they were distinct and we could share resources, that's changing in the worst years.
Does Australia have enough air tankers for this summer and a projected very hot year in 2027?
Look, the Fire and Emergency Services, the current fire chiefs and commissioners are doing a fantastic job working with the Commonwealth Government to contract large fixed-wing aircraft, large helicopters to come and work here. Our single large air tanker that's owned by the New South Wales Government is currently working in California. So well-practiced procedures to share equipment. I'm hoping the fire season in the north doesn't continue too late because we could find early in our fire season there's restrictions on us accessing those aircraft, those same aircraft that we'll want to bring here. But thankfully we're not in drought yet. Next year might be a totally different question.
There's a lot of talk about sovereignty at the moment, these days really. You talked about the fact that all but one of our large air tankers are contracted from overseas. Should Australia own more air tankers?
My personal opinion is definitely, because I think the fire seasons will lengthen, they will overlap more and more. At some stage will be found wanting because those aircraft are owned in the Northern Hemisphere. So if they need them, they're not going to let them go. And
if I can just come back to the current conditions, when you look out across the country, what do you see?
Look, Sarah, at the moment I'm not concerned. We're not in drought, but I see massive fuel loads because since 2020, in New South Wales, for example, we've been able to do cumulatively year on year, probably less than 20% of the hazard reduction burns that have been scheduled because it's been too wet. So there's no, the disinformation about greenies stopping hazard reduction or whatever, that's just rubbish. We just can't do it. And I'm a volunteer firefighter and I've been helping develop programs, but we just don't have the opportunities. So lots of growth, but with this El Nino coming, it will mean hotter, drier conditions. But what worries me is the year after an El Nino is usually the hottest. So 2027, I think we'll have a busy year for fires. I think it'll be back on the TV screens, but then the summer of 27, 28 could be a real worry.
Greg Mullins, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.